It was just past 9 on a Tuesday morning when the doors slid open at Stillwater Community Bangkok quiet, unassuming branch nestled on the edge of a sleepy road in eastern Connecticut. The kind of place where people knew each other's names, the coffee always tasted a little burnt, and the copier had a whine to it that made everyone flinch once an hour. The floors were still damp from the janitor's mop, the air smelled like citrus and toner, and the staff behind the desk were half-settled sipping from paper cups, chatting about weekend soccer games and dinner leftovers. No one really noticed when the man rolled in. Not at first. His name was Marshall Ray, 68 years old, black, retired military, and the kind of person who carried silence like a weapon. He wore a pressed gray windbreaker zipped all the way up, dark slacks without a wrinkle, and an old navy blue cap pulled low over his brow. His wheelchair creaked softly with each rotation, but his hands thick, calloused, sure moved with practiced ease. He didn't ask for help, and he didn't need any. He moved slowly through the lobby like a man who'd seen enough places to know when a room sized you up before you even said a word. A few glances lifted. A teenage boy near the brochures paused his texting. A woman in scrubs by the ATM pulled her bag a little closer. One man with a veteran's cap gave a faint nod, then went back to reading yesterday's paper. Marshall rolled to the front counter and stopped quiet, steady. The woman behind the desk didn't look up. Her name tag said Carrie, blonde bob, flat-ironed, eyes glued to her screen like it held the secrets of the world. "Excuse me," Marshall said, voice low but polite. "Would it be possible to speak with your branch manager?" She didn't look up, just sighed. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, ma'am, but I'd appreciate." Her hand came up flat, palm out, like a traffic cop cutting him off without a second thought. Then, without bothering to whisper, she leaned toward her coworker and said, "Another one of them here to cash someone else's check or yell about fees." She said it casually, not angry worse than that, like it was something she'd said 100 times before. Marshall didn't react, not visibly. The man in the veteran's cap slowly lowered his paper. The boy near the brochures took out one earbud. The nurse in scrubs furrowed her brow. Still, nobody said anything. "I can wait," Marshall said, just as calm. "But I'd still like to speak to the manager." That's when Carrie finally looked at him. Barely. Her eyes darted over the wheelchair, the hat, the coat. And then she exhaled long and loud, like she was doing the room a favor. "Sir," she said, her voice flat, "unless you're here for a transaction or have an appointment, you'll need to sit down and wait like everyone else." "I'm not here to withdraw money," he said, voice still even. "Then what are you here for?" she snapped, just a bit sharper. "Because I don't have time to guess this morning." The lobby shifted. Marshall glanced at the others. He wasn't new to this. He'd been misjudged, dismissed, talked over, talked at decades of it. This wasn't new. He opened the leather folder resting in his lap slowly, methodically like a man pulling out boardroom documents. A crisp white form. Corporate header at the top. He didn't shove it. Didn't wave it around. Just slid it across the counter and tapped it once. "I'd appreciate it if you handed this to your branch manager." Carrie didn't even read it. She pushed it aside with a painted pinky nail like it was a used napkin. "We don't take paperwork from random people," she said, sounding almost offended. "If you have a complaint, there's a form online." "It's not a complaint," Marshall replied, steady. "It's documentation." "Well, unless you're a banker or a donor to this building, sir, you can go wait over there." And then just for good measure she smiled that tight, dismissive smile, the kind that made you feel like you were beneath the desk she sat behind. Marshall didn't move, didn't flinch. He just watched. A few feet away, a man named Jorge, mid-40s, Latino, seated at a loan officer's desk, quietly glanced up. He hadn't heard everything, but he'd heard enough. He stood. "Is there a problem here?" Carrie didn't look at him. "No. Jorge, I've got it," she said sharply, eyes still locked on her screen. "Just someone who doesn't understand appointments." Jorge took a step closer. "Carrie, you might want to." "I said I've got it," she snapped again, louder this time. The whole lobby heard it. And then she muttered it. Not loud, but clear enough. "You people always want special treatment." Time stopped. The nurse turned. The boy lowered his phone. The veteran sat straighter. "Marshall?" He didn't even blink. "Would you mind taking a look at this, sir?" he said quietly to Jorge, motioning toward the form. Jorge walked over, picked it up, and his whole face changed. His fingers tightened on the paper. His lips pressed into a line. "Carrie," he said, "this is from corporate." "What?" she scoffed. "That can't be. You need to call Eleanor. Now." Carrie hesitated. Her hand reached for the phone like it weighed 100 pounds. She dialed. Jorge leaned down and returned the paper to Marshall with gentle hands. "Thank you for your patience, sir," he said. Carrie finally asked, Wait, you work for the bank?" Marshall didn't answer. Didn't have to. Because 2 minutes later, the manager Eleanor Rowe, early 50s, sharp blazer, calm eyes, stepped out of the hallway, took one look at Marshall, and froze. "Mr. Ray," she said, voice soft but certain. "I wasn't told you'd be visiting this branch today." "I don't announce these visits," Marshall said. "I prefer to see things the way they really are." Carrie's face turned a shade paler. Eleanor turned to her. "We'll talk later." "I didn't know who he was," Carrie stammered. "That's not the point," Eleanor replied. Marshall rolled forward. "The footage from this morning does this branch record audio?" "Yes, sir," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Good," he nodded. "I'd like to review it before we move forward." Carrie stepped back, mouth open, but she didn't say another word. Inside the office, the room was quiet. The video played back everything. Her tone, her words, the way she never even looked him in the eye. Eleanor didn't raise her voice, didn't make a speech. She simply looked at Carrie and said, "Please hand over your badge." Carrie froze. "You're letting me go?" "No," Marshall said, voice calm. "You let yourself go the moment you chose to treat someone like they were beneath you before you knew who they were." Carrie handed over the badge, walked out without a word. Back in the lobby, no one said anything. But everything felt different. The teenager finally muttered, "Dang, she thought he was just some nobody." His mom whispered back, "He never needed to be loud. He just needed to be right." Marshall sat still, the room quiet around him. Then, slowly, he turned toward the remaining staff, 6 of them now gathered. "I don't make surprise visits to catch people," he said. "I do it to see how they treat strangers. Because how you treat someone you think can't help you. That's the real test of character." No one clapped. No one nodded. They just listened. Because in that moment, every single person there knew it wasn't about power. It was about presence. And Marshall Ray didn't raise his voice to change that room. He just refused to be pushed out of it. Now here's the question I leave for you. Do you think Carrie deserved to be fired? Was the response to her share not enough? And how many people have we dismissed in our own lives just because they looked like they had nothing to offer? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about what real respect looks like before someone has to earn it with a title. And if this story made you feel something, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories about quiet power, dignity, and the everyday moments that reveal who we really are. Marshall didn't stay long after that. He didn't need to. He shook Eleanor's hand, thanked Jorge quietly, and gave a nod to Clarence, the janitor who had silently offered him water earlier and had been watching the whole thing unfold from behind a mop bucket like he'd seen it all before. Marshall gave him a wink, and Clarence just chuckled and tipped his cap. Out in the parking lot, Marshall sat for a moment before wheeling himself to his old pickup. It took him a minute. He moved slower these days, arthritis settling in like an old roommate who never quite left, but he still did everything himself. Always had. Just before pulling the door shut, he glanced back at the glass front of the bank. A few faces were peeking out: the teenager, the nurse, even Jorge. And for the first time that morning, someone smiled first. Back home, Marshall sat at the kitchen table, folded the incident report, and placed it in a worn brown folder marked Site Visits, Integrity Checks. Inside were dozens more. He didn't dwell on them, didn't carry them like anger. Just reminders. Proof that the job wasn't done. You see, Marshall wasn't just a shareholder. He was part of the oversight team responsible for evaluating local branches, not just for performance, but for something far harder to quantify: human decency. And what happened that morning? That wasn't about catching someone making a mistake. It was about watching what people do when they think no one's watching. That folder would get filed away, just like the rest. And one day, when the board asked why he kept showing up unannounced, in that same worn windbreaker and cap, he'd tell them. Because no one wears their prejudice when they think they're being judged. They wear it when they think they're alone. So here's what I want to ask you, the one watching this. Have you ever been dismissed like Marshall? Talked over, ignored, written off just because someone didn't think you looked the part? Or maybe have you ever caught yourself doing that to someone else, even if just for a second? We don't like to admit it, but the truth is, respect costs nothing and yet too many people act like it's a privilege to be handed out. Let's change that. Start small. Say good morning to someone you'd normally walk past. Let the quiet kid in class finish his sentence. Tip the waitress who's clearly having a rough day. And if you ever find yourself behind a desk, don't assume the man in the wheelchair is there to ask for help. He just might be the one deciding if you get to keep your job. Drop a comment below, tell us where you draw the line between a bad attitude and a dangerous assumption. Share a time someone surprised you or a time you surprised yourself. And if you believe stories like this matter, hit like, subscribe, and send this to someone who still thinks titles define worth. Because some of the most powerful people in this world don't need a nameplate to make you remember them. They just need one moment. And when that moment comes, you better hope you're on the right side of it.